Video game graphics have rapidly accelerated over the last few decades, but as they've become more realistic, something strange has happened. Compare a modern release to any game from the 1990s and there is no confusing them. It's night and day. So why are modern horror games just less scary? What is it about retro horror that is genuinely chilling? There's something about old horror games, specifically PC and PS1 games from the late 1990s. On the surface they're not great, objectively bad graphics, janky controls and sluggish gameplay. Not good. But when taken as an overall package, these things turn out to be ingredients for a truly unsettling experience. Maybe that's just my personal opinion, but there is some logic to back it up, which, for me is quite unusual. With limitations on graphics at the time, developers focused on story, giving us a world of eerie characters and atmospheric mystery. And it's not just the attention to detail. Something in the low poly graphics actually adds to the terror. A lot of people find modern remakes to be less scary than the original games themselves. Which, is kind of weird. They're basically the exact same game, just with more clarity now. Here's the thing. Less detail means less certainty with what we're experiencing. It's like how horror movies are more scary at night, and retro video games are always going to be less clear. Lacking detail, it's up to our imagination to fill in the gaps, and the human mind can be a creepy place. So a game from 1999 is always going to be more scary than a modern game with modern graphics. And speaking of 1999, that's the same year Silent Hill came out, which I think is the single best example of retro horror. Unusually cinematic for the time, it tells the story of Harry Mason, an ordinary man who just wants to find his missing daughter, and in doing so, finds himself in a mysterious town plagued by monsters and evil cult members. It's all very creepy, but by far the most eerie part is the visual element. Specifically is the thick shroud of fog found everywhere in the town. Fog itself is a good mood setter, but its primary role in Silent Hill is covering up the technical limitations of level design, and it works perfectly, making players feel lost and alone. Every step the character takes draws them further into the unknown. Where fog is not used, darkness is, so at any moment some kind of demonic creature could emerge right in front of you, effectively keeping you on edge throughout the entire game. Modern games are typically unable to reproduce this. Yes, they have beautiful, in-depth level design, but what they lack is visual ambiguity. Adding to this, the music and sound effects were deliberately created to induce what you might call a feeling of cold isolation. In fact, a lot of the time there's no music at all, just an eerie silence. The combination of such eerie silence and dense fog does a lot of legwork. But even with that being so, I always come back to the low poly graphics, and we can see this in the numerous other creepy horror games that came out in 1999. Games like Hell Night, Dino Crisis, and one of my personal favourites, Nocturne. Similar in tone to Silent Hill, Nocturne tells the story of a secret government agency tasked with investigating the paranormal. Interestingly, it is set during the Depression era, and has a genuinely well thought out narrative. Movement is difficult to control, and in many ways is just a poor man's Silent Hill, but they did a great job creating an otherworldly feel. So why was 1999 such an iconic year in horror gaming? Well, it might have something to do with Resident Evil 2, a massively well-received game that came out just 1 year before. It would eventually go on to sell 6 million copies, and today is remembered as an all-time great release. That kind of success always triggers copycat projects among rival developers, and like a new gold rush, dozens of survival horror games were commissioned. Go back further and games were even more technologically limited, which often made them even more creepy. In 1995, countless children were traumatized by a game called I forget to pronounce it. Phantasmagoria. Hang on. Phantasmagoria. Okay. There's a game called Phantasmagoria and it scared a lot of children. Essentially an interactive horror movie, it was a point-and-click adventure game set in a haunted mansion once owned by a serial killer. Phantasmagoria was unusual for its time in its use of graphic violence and sexual content. This paired with a retro 90s sci-fi aesthetic gives a genuinely unnerving feel. By far the best clips are the game over cutscenes.
You never stop talking, do you? Never ever. You just keep droning on and on and on.
There's a bunch of them and they seem to get more and more disturbing as you progress through the game. It's crazy. Some of these are mental.
Tonight for you a special feast, Regina. I prepared all your favorites. Doesn't this look delicious?
With more than 1 million copies sold, we can only imagine how many young people were scarred by it. I mean, it is rated mature, but it's a point-and-click game, so I'm pretty sure at least some kids played it. Which is funny. There are some modern games that manage to be creepy in the same way that retro games are. I'm a big fan of the Alan Wake games, but there are two things to be said about that. First of all, it's a narrative-based game and the story is the main selling point. Also, it's a very dark game. Literally. The sheer darkness of the gameplay mimics a retro low-poly effect, simply because you can't see much. And in recent years we have started to see a whole industry pop up mimicking low-poly games. Entire game studios are specialising in creating retro-style graphics in a very direct way. So you don't need to worry about truly creepy games being a thing of the past. It's also a thing of the present. That being said, I'm going to end this video by recommending some old and some new creepy games. Thanks for watching.